So if you're going to withstand, you got to have patience. Is it going to die because you scared?
Noah.
God told us.
And so we're going to put Moses in an ark.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome again to another episode of the C3 Podcast. I'm Minister Robert Webb, and I'm here with our pastor, master teacher, Dr. Earl Grant. Listen, if you haven't watched the previous episode, I encourage you to go watch all of the episodes that you have missed. So we want to welcome our first-time guest to the to the C3 Podcast. This is your first time. We welcome you. Today, we are talking about unshakable withstanding. And again, we're in Hebrews 11, and this is this is verse 23 in Hebrews 11. And it says, by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. We were talking about unshakable wherewithal. Now we're talking about unshakable withstanding. In your definition, in your words, what is withstanding, Pastor?
So withstanding means to stand against. It means to resist, or it means to oppose with firm determination or determined effort. And then there was one description of what withstanding means that really struck me. And it says to receive without being changed. To withstand means that you can receive something or have something come against you or come at you or be put up on you without it changing you. You're able to withstand. And I see that as a great need today for the family of faith, is to be able to withstand all of the things that's coming against us, and not let it change us.
When you gave that last definition, talking about something coming against you, but it's not changing you, I think about, we're talking about a different person here in Moses' parents, but King Darius made a decree about it wasn't going to be no praying around them parts. And that didn't change a certain individual from praying.
You can withstand.
You can withstand. Matter of fact, he withstood out in the open. Anyway, but that ain't who we're talking about today. Today we're talking about Moses' parents withstanding this king's edict. Talk to me about this particular story about Moses' parents and what they did after this edict went out.
Well, the edict was from the Pharaoh here in Egypt. And this is the Pharaoh who didn't know Joseph. And so he was an insecure Pharaoh because the children of Israel were multiplying, they were expanding, they were growing. So he was threatened by them. And so he wanted to try to stop their growth. So he made this edict that all the male children were supposed to be thrown into the Nile. They were supposed to be killed. And but the Lord kept blessing. The midwives didn't act right, and the Lord kept blessing, and they were still growing. And so in this case, Moses' parents, they've had 2 children already. They had Aaron and Miriam, and now here comes Moses, and they're supposed to throw him in the Nile, but they keep the child and hide him for 3 months. So they were withstanding and not letting the king's edict change their position as parents.
So, in order for us to be able to have unshakable withstanding, what are some key elements to being able to do that?
Well, in the case of Moses' parents, we see there was a presence of faith. They had faith in God, and they didn't let what the king said deter them from their faith. They not only had the presence of faith, but there was a partnership because they were in it together.
Mm-hmm.
The mother and the father and the rest of the family. They all was in this together to do this to help protect the child. And so if you're going to withstand, you got to have faith, and you need to have some partnership in that endeavor. And so when you look at the practically looking at it, you got to stay connected with the family. You got to stay connected with the family. You got to know that y'all are in this together. It's where you get encouragement. That's where you get support. It's where you get strength. And then you got to put into practice what you know about God. Because a lot of us hear a lot, but we don't do what we hear. And so they showed that they not only heard the word of God and knew who God was and what God was like and what God desired of the family, they were putting it into practice. And then you got to understand that what you can't control, God is already controlling. So God is in charge. When it comes to this life, we got to turn our focus to the fact that God has power. He's all powerful. And the last thing is, he cares.
And as I'm looking at this particular scripture, they were able to hide him for 3 months.
I don't know how they did that. I don't know how you
hide a baby
for 3 months. He must have been a quiet baby for the
he
first 3 months anyway. He slept a lot, I guess.
He had to be. But then this also speaks about if you're going to be able to withstand, you got to do like we talked about in the last episode. You got to have some patience, knowing that the promise is going to come. So if you're going to withstand, you got to have patience.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
They demonstrated some patience, but then at the end, after those 3 months, they said, we got to do something else.
Yeah,
we got to do something else. But they were still trusting God.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I love about this. They saw something in the child that gave them the wherewithal.
Yes, sir.
To know that God has something special for this child. And so we're willing to risk our lives to bring this to pass. Now, it's interesting to me because God, we say, he's all powerful. He can do what he wants to do, however he wants to do it, whenever he wants. So, God, why didn't you just miraculously protect the child, keep the child away, do all this? Why do we have to go through this? Why are we under this kind of oppression and all this when you gonna make it happen anyway? So why we got to go through this? But that's the sovereignty of God. God is helping us to become who he wants us to be, and yet in the process glorify him.
Yeah, I was gonna say it. Spiritual development.
Yeah,
that's why I'm sovereign, and that's why I could step in, but I'm not, because this is what you need to do to continue to spiritually develop into who I've called you to be. It's amazing. They had enough faith to risk their life. Are you willing to risk your life?
Yeah.
For the for the blessing and the promise to come to pass, or is it gonna die because you scared? Because I like this last part. It says because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict.
Yeah, because when you look at them, they are an obscure couple. So obscure that they really, in Exodus 2, they don't even mention their name. It's later in Exodus you find out the name, but I'm saying they were just the parents,
the conduits.
Yeah, but in the midst of all that was going on, these two parents were unafraid when all of the other parents were killing their children. You had these two said, we gonna withstand. Everybody else taking their children down to the Nile,
and throwing
them in, and dealing with the grief and regret and hurt and all that they got to go through with for doing that. But we are willing to risk it all and keep this child.
Sounds like if you're gonna withstand, you got to be willing to do stuff that other folks are not willing to do.
That's withstand. Don't let them change you. Because they giving in don't mean you got to give in.
Man, and then you just brought this up. You think about what the other parents had to deal with the grief and and the regret of throwing their children over into the Nile and killing their own children. That's something that they got to live with.
Yes.
They would much rather risk their lives, these two, Moses' parents, they would much rather risk their lives to see the promise come to pass rather than risk Moses' life and have to deal with the consequences and the regrets of you not doing what God told you to do.
There you go. There you go.
And at the end of the day, I would much rather do what God tells me to do and be at risk of losing this natural life rather than doing what my flesh and everybody else around me is doing, in the sense of throwing my child in this river. We have to be willing to withstand. But everybody ain't willing to withstand, Pastor.
No, but they withstood, and then they helped protect Moses even when they had to let him go from the house. They put him in an ark, which is the means to protect.
The wherewithal.
The wherewithal. And it's interesting to me as I thought about it that the only thing that they knew of or had been told of that was a means of protection that God had used in the past was an ark. So when judgment was coming and when death was imminent, what could we do to protect our child from impending death and provide him salvation?
Sounds like they scrolled up in Hebrews 11. It's all by faith. Noah.
By faith. We heard about Noah. We heard about Noah. Somebody told us about Noah.
Told us.
And so we're going to put Moses in an ark and pitch it inside and out, just like Noah did the ark. Put some tar on it to protect him. And then we're going to put him in a place where he can be found, and and the rest of the story, that's what I see.
We have to be able to withstand, and as you were talking, I'm thinking about withstanding ain't for me. Withstanding is it's for someone else. I have to be able to withstand, but me withstanding isn't necessarily for me to withstand. It's so we can protect. It's so that we can ensure that the blessing in this sense, that is Moses, who is going to be a conduit for the deliverance of the Israelites, so then they can take Joseph's bones where they got to go. It's this whole thing, this passing of this blessing. It's not about me. Me being able to withstand is not for my own good to say I withstood. No, I withstood so the blessing can continue to roll on and pass on.
Yeah, it's passing on, because you talked about the bones from Joseph. Moses was the one that had to take the bones out the first time. I mean, he was the first one. Yeah. And then he had to pass the bones on to Joshua. To cross over. But yeah, so it was necessary. It was necessary for them to withstand, and I believe it's necessary for parents today to withstand so that we can protect our children, so that they can receive the promise that God has for them.
That's the C3 Podcast episode for today, guys. We hope you all have been enjoying these episodes. We hope that they have been inspiring and enlightening. Our hope and our prayer is that you would share these. Make sure you're commenting, on these videos so we can hear your thoughts and get back to you with any questions that you may have. Pastor, do you have any closing remarks or words of encouragement for us as we end this episode?
Withstand.
There it is. Thank you for joining us on the C3 Podcast. We'll see you next time.
Well, hello, and thank you for joining the C3 Podcast of Covenant Community Church. We are delighted and excited that you chose to be with us today. And if you have any questions or comments that you would like to share with us, we invite you to go to our website at mycovenantcc.com. Fill out our virtual connection card, share your comment or your question, and I promise you we'll get back to you as soon as possible.